Thank you for being with us tonight, Dr. Jacobs. Really looking forward to your talk. Whenever you're ready, just go ahead.
Okay, thanks, Kenny. I'm certainly going to need a little methylation support after having all that technical difficulties. So I'm glad it worked out. I'm excited to be here. I got a little crazy, a little happy with the slideshows. I put a lot of slides together over the past few days, so we've got a lot to cover. And I understand that there's probably healthcare practitioners as well as just general health enthusiasts on the line. So I hope that we can cover all the bases and get everybody some good information. Okay. So my objective is to finalize and finally prove this concept that one dietary approach does not fit all. And I think we all know this, whether you're in the medical field or not, we all realize that one dietary approach does not work for everybody. If it did, we wouldn't really be in this profession. We'd all know what to eat and how to live. But it wasn't until I really started studying genetics that I realized how individualized nutrition really can be. And so I think we can use this genetic test, or have been using these genetic tests, to really put personalized nutrition together for folks. And so it's really changed my practice in a lot of ways, and I'm excited to share some of these intricacies with everyone. So yes, so one size does not fit all. We've heard it before. You've got the paleo community, we've got the vegan community, low calorie, high fat. What works for one person doesn't work for everybody. And so I say, there's about, I think you would probably agree with me, Keone, that maybe 80 to 90% of folks will just do well getting all of the inflammatory foods out of the diet. And beyond that, you don't have to do much with micromanaging the diet. But what about the other 10 or 20%? That was the percentage that I was interested in, is what happens when some of these folks don't get better with some of those standard recommendations and putting them on a just general whole foods type of diet. So for me, it started with my cleanse program. I created it, when I started practice, because I was telling people over and over again the same thing: eat this, don't eat this. And so I thought, well, let's put it in a group atmosphere. Got the program together. So over the years, we've been doing it in person, locally, and then online. So we've had hundreds and hundreds of people go through, lots of success stories. But then some people weren't getting better. And what is the difference with those people? So for me, it started with this patient. I really started to look at genetics with this patient that had unrelenting brain fog. So if you have brain fog, I don't have to go any further because the word brain fog just sums it up nicely. You know what brain fog means. For those of you that aren't really familiar, brain fog, it really feels like there's a fog inside of your brain. You're trying to think through mud. It's like the thoughts are there, but you can't really quite get them out. So it's not a very fun experience, as you can imagine. But I had this patient I've been working with for a long time with significant fatigue and brain fog. And when I first started, looking at some of these genetic panels, I would run them on my family first. And that's the best way to get started, is to run something on your family and use them as guinea pigs, and then go from there. So this patient had significant brain fog, and I did this one fairly simple dietary change with her that we'll discuss, and her brain fog within a couple days completely cleared up. And so I knew I was on to something. I knew that looking at these genetic panels was going to offer me a different level of information when it came to nutrition. So that's what I got really excited about. And if you've looked at some of this stuff with genetics and, specifically methylation and this fancy word MTHFR, you know that there is a lot of buzz online. There's a lot of online community because everybody's trying to interpret their own genetic panels. There's not a lot of doctors out there doing it. There's not a lot of doctors that really want to do it. It's quite complex, and we don't learn it in medical school. So a lot of these groups are out there, and what I realized when I was searching around is that everybody's asking, what do you eat if you have MTHFR? What's the MTHFR diet? What should we put into our mouths? And so my love for nutrition, which I've had long before I went to medical school, got me really interested in, can we look at the genetics and can we figure out what exactly to eat? I'm not a geneticist, I'm not a biochemist, I'm not looking deep into these pathways and doing all this research. I'm a clinician, and I want to take any information that I can and make it clinically applicable to my patients so that my patients get better. And so that's what I've tried to do with some of this detailed genetic information. So why might we use some genetic panels? They're affordable. There's tons of data. The data is not going to change, so it's not like a CBC and a Chem where, in a week you're going to have fairly different numbers. In 10 years, you're going to have that same genetic panel. It's a preventative approach. You can find a lot of missing links. So when people are not getting better, and we've all had those patients that we're just banging our heads up against the wall because they're just not getting better, what can we do for them? This can provide that extra level of information. And then beyond the nutritional approach, there's a lot of information. There's apps that you can use where you can put in your genetic profile and you can find out how you metabolize certain medications. So that's pretty great information right there. So, you know, God forbid if you're in the hospital or if you get sick down the road, knowing how certain medications are going to interact with your genetics is a pretty cool thing. So I think that makes it very much worth it. What I can say genetics is not, it's not a cure-all. And so, you know, I think every few years we kind of have this one diagnosis that we're all putting all our eggs in one basket. So whether it's, you know, candida or mercury toxicity, whatever it might be, right now it seems to be MTHFR. But I'm not saying these things absolutely 100% exist. But I think every time there's this new popular diagnosis, we all want to put and say, like, okay, well, this is going to be it. It's going to explain all my health stuff over the years, and I'll take this nutrient, and it's all going to get better. And unfortunately, it doesn't work quite like that. It is a bigger picture. It is a blueprint, and there are steps that you have to take, and it's not just a quick fix. So food first approach. This has always been my passion, is how can we utilize food to get ourselves better and get ourselves, be the healthiest that we can possibly be. So food first approach is so important, I think, and food is so powerful. It's something that we put into our body many times a day, every single day, and it makes significant changes in our biochemistry. And so I think we need to learn to really utilize food first and food as medicine. So again, we've got a blueprint to determine what we might need, and our genetics provides us that blueprint. I think NDs in particular, we are so great at lab interpretation. I didn't realize this until I got out of school and would talk to other medical doctors and realize, you know, what the preventative approach we have when it comes to looking at certain labs, CBCs and chems, where we can really get in there, you know, tell people a year or two before your blood sugar is ever overtly out of range on labs, we can find out that you have blood sugar issues and prevent you from ever having elevated blood sugar on labs. So we're really good at this. We're really good at the use of functional labs. So we can utilize food-based labs. We can utilize digestive labs to get a full picture of what's going on with somebody. And I think that's where we really excel. And that's where I think genetics can offer that other component for us in terms of functional labs that we can use. And I think we already talked about it, but it is Naturopathic Medicine Awareness Week, so everybody get out there and support naturopathic medicine. So from a simple genetic panel, I think we can get a wealth of nutrition information. And so here is everything that we're going to cover this evening. We're going to go into a little bit of detail on all of these different pieces of information, and this is just really touching the surface. There's a few slides I didn't put in here. There's certainly people that are doing very detailed methylation work, and it goes even beyond these slides. But I think, you know, for a genetic test that could cost $99, and you quickly glance at this list here, you can see how valuable it could be. So practitioners that are on the line, you know this all too well, but for the rest of us, briefly, just want to say methylation is kind of what we're looking at when we're looking at genetics. It's the main bulk of what we're looking at. And methylation is simply the transfer of a methyl group from one molecule to the next. It happens billions of times every second, and it's essential to life. So you can see if this process is so essential to life and it's happening so readily that if there's a slowed process or a defect in the methylation cycle, that lots of different problems can occur. And they can be, you know, fairly benign things like lower energy or headaches all the way up to cancer. So it's pretty significant things that we're looking at. When you hear the word SNPs, this is where genetics meet diet for me. So a SNP is a single nucleotide polymorphism, and it's just a variation in the position of the DNA sequence. So what happens when you have a certain SNP is that it can correlate with certain genetic traits or changes to the function of an enzyme. So that's why we're looking at the SNPs, and that's how we're seeing how can we, with certain SNPs, get them working better through a dietary approach so that we can prevent certain illnesses so that we can optimize our health. MTHFR is the one, you know, that's what we call this presentation, is the MTHFR diet, because that's the one that's most well studied. It's the variant that most people are familiar with. So we're going to look at various SNPs and see what a person needs nutritionally. Got a list here of associated conditions, things that are associated with altered methylation, and you can see, I'm not going to go through this list, but it can really be anything. Testing. So I personally utilize 23andme.com for testing, and if you are not familiar, you can still get your health information. So it's been a little while now that they stepped in and they said, you know, we're no longer going to provide the health information. We're only going to provide ancestry information for you folks. And so what we do is utilize this 23andMe information. We utilize what's called the raw data. So you can actually go in and pick out the raw data. You can browse the raw data, so you can actually look at individual genetics. I utilize the app MTHFR Support. And that links everything up to research. So it's primary research. It puts it into categories. I really like the app. If you're not in the medical profession, you might want to use some of these other apps like LiveWello or Genetic Genie, because MTHFR Support app, again, you have to look at primary research. So not everybody is wanting to do that piece of it. It can get fairly in-depth. I call it the rabbit hole. You can go down the rabbit hole pretty quickly with looking at all these individual SNPs. So don't get lost in those individual SNPs. Really step back and try to look at the bigger picture. Just because you have a genetic SNP or genetic variation, it doesn't mean that it's a problem. For those of you who are working with patients, you really have to take the case and you've got to treat the client. But one of the reasons with the FDA, I really agreed with them not providing the health information anymore is because if you've ever seen it, they really just did this printout, and the printout would say you've got a 20% increased risk of cancer, you've got a 10% increased risk of diabetes. So you didn't have a person in the middle explaining this to you. So I think it was very disheartening for a lot of people because they're just going to assume that these are my genes, this is what it's going to happen, this is what I'm destined to have. So it's very disheartening. You know, when I'm going through panels with people, I might say this could put you at an increased risk of cancer, but now we have the pathway in front of us, so what can we do to make sure that that never happens? How can we support that pathway? Which is a very different look on interpreting these panels. So who should get tested? I think everybody should get tested because I think it's fascinating information, but you have to be prepared for a ton of information. You're talking about, you know, 16 pages of data if you go through the MTHFR Support app. And that's a lot of information, particularly if you've got a patient in front of you who is just starting to look at nutrition or natural medicine, and then you have 16 pages worth of information about their B vitamin cycles and their antioxidants, and it can be quite overwhelming. So you have to be prepared for that. People that have chronic symptoms, this is great for those folks. You can really put some pieces of the puzzle together. Are sensitive folks. So for a long time I was working with folks, I'd give them a drop of B12 and they'd have muscle aches, change their diet and they get worse. Finally, after looking at some of their genetics, I could make sense of it after all these years. I could figure out why people are so sensitive to certain things. So they're great candidates because, again, you have a blueprint there in front of you, so instead of trying different things, you can sort of see what they might react well to and what they might be a little bit more sensitive to. The healthier you are, the harder I think these tests are to interpret. And I've certainly had quite a few people, elite athletes come in and they just want to take it to that next level and they get this genetic test done. And then you might see areas that are, quote unquote, weak or areas where they need a little bit more support. But it's very hard if somebody doesn't have any symptoms to create a treatment plan for them. So those have actually been my toughest folks, or the healthier folks, to look at their genetics. Still worthwhile, but you have to think about that. I've got Dr. Ben Lynch. He's a forerunner in this field, and he's with Seeking Health. This is his It Makes My Brain Hurt. But to look at it and realize how intricate all of this is and why we have to really look at the whole picture, you can see there's all these different cycles going on. So if you work with just one part of the cycle, you're really actually changing the rest of the cycle for good and for bad. But it's quite complex, and you can just look at this diagram and know why some people don't want to get involved. Again, we didn't really learn all the details of it in medical school, so it can be a bit overwhelming. According to Dr. Lynch, all of these different areas are part of the functions of methylation. So you can see how important methylation is. It's turning genes on and off. It's creating neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin, processing estrogen, producing energy and antioxidants. So methylation is super, super important. So let's get to the good stuff, and that is, what do bad MTHFRs eat? And this is the fun stuff. So it's always going to start in the gut. right? So this is what we learn in naturopathic medicine from day one. I'm sure Dr. Jillian would agree with me here that everything starts in the gut. So no matter who you're working with, I think no matter what the SNPs show, if somebody's not feeling well, you really have to look first at their digestive health. It's not just about what we're putting into our mouths, it's really about what we're absorbing from our food, and that really is so key to all of this. Even when we talk about some of the intricacies of diet that we're going to talk about, I really feel like people shouldn't have to micromanage their diet when their gut is really healthy. So in the short term, we have to look at some of the foods that we're going to talk about, but really I want people to get to a place where they just eat food and they don't have to constantly stress about the food that they're putting into their mouth, as long as it's good, whole, unprocessed food, right? So there are a couple SNPs that we feel like are associated with altered gut flora and dysbiosis. There's the ACAT and the SHMT. Those SNPs will show up on your panel, and that can give you a little bit of a clue. There's other autoimmune-related SNPs. And there's a lot of SNPs for immune reactions, so IgE, IgG, IgA SNPs. Those can all alert you to some kind of leaky gut situation, some type of problem going on in the gut that needs to be addressed first and foremost. So you'll see some delayed food reactions. So I like to look at the panels. Again, when I see some of these IgG and IgA SNPs, which a lot of people have. So again, just because a SNP is there doesn't mean it's expressing, but if you see a lot of these SNPs and you're taking a good case, you might realize this person has delayed food reactions, and that might be the biggest part of their symptom picture. So, and the delayed food reaction is you can eat a food on a Monday, and Wednesday you can have a reaction from that food. So the joint pain, the depression, the stomach ache, all of that can be delayed 24 to 72 hours after ingestion. It's tough to get a feel for. Most conventional doctors don't want to touch this kind of reaction at all because it's very vague. The time delay is tough for people to realize. I mean, who has a symptom on a Wednesday and says, oh gosh, what did I eat Monday? We just don't really think in those terms. It's really easy for us to say, oh, I eat a peanut and then I have a reaction. My throat swells and I have to go to the hospital. That's that IgE reaction. It's quick, it's immediate, it's clear. IgG and IgA's reactions are not so clear. The testing for those is fairly controversial as well. I really like to test for IgG and IgA foods. I think it's very valuable, but it's not perfect. If we had a test that was perfect, then none of us would ever experiment with diet. I would love, and I think all of my patients would love to go in, have a blood test done. It would show them exactly what to eat, exactly what to avoid, and to have optimal health, and then they never have to worry about their symptoms or their foods again. That would be brilliant, and it just unfortunately doesn't work that way. So you can certainly start with the sensitive 7, those inflammatory foods that are most common in most people. Get those out of the diet first and see how somebody improves. If they haven't already done that, oftentimes by the time somebody is coming in with their genetic panel, they've done a lot of these other things already and they need to know that extra piece of information. But the sensitive 7, that's gluten, dairy, corn, soy, egg, peanut, and sugar. Okay, they're pretty well-known food sensitivities. A lot of people will react to those foods. And then there's some outliers there too, like some of the nightshade families that can be problematic. Certainly coffee and alcohol, those can be problematic as well. But beyond that, so that's my favorite diet to do across the board, but not everybody gets better. So we have to go that extra mile. So here is just the first page of a 96 food panel that I like to run, and it's the IgG and the IgA. You can see the different immunoglobulins there and see which ones are high. So I think this is great information. I mean, this person here, they've got kind of the classic dairy, egg, coffee is an issue, potential issue here coming up. But sometimes other foods can show up that you just would not think to eliminate in the diet. So maybe for her, they're not quite too high, but blueberry and cranberry. Blueberry are one of the healthiest foods on the planet, but if somebody's not tolerating them, then they need to get them out of the diet for a little while and focus on gut health. The problem with this panel is that if a food shows up negative, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a free-for-all. The positive foods to me are positive. We need to get them out for a little while, but the negative foods are still unknown, so it's a little bit of an unknown there. Antioxidant needs, a lot of your genetic panel is going to show antioxidant needs. There's a lot of SNPs there that have to do with mitochondrial health. SOD and NOS are there, so these are some of the SNPs that you can see, and somebody needs a different level of antioxidant support. Definitely through diet first. For many of these patients with fibromyalgia and chronic fatigue syndrome, they almost always have a ton of mitochondrial SNPs, which makes sense, right? We really think of these issues as mitochondrial issues. So they're going to need higher force intervention with, vitamin C and CoQ10 and turmeric, choline, all of these kinds of things potentially. But you certainly want to optimize the antioxidants in their diet on a daily basis. The Brassicaceae family, that's our cruciferous vegetables. The first whole page, at least when you print it out on the MTHFR support app, is all the CYP genetic SNPs. And so they let us know how we're metabolizing our estrogens. And we certainly in the naturopathic field use concentrated sources of the Brassicaceae family like DEM and I3C. But you can see lots of different cruciferous vegetables that we want to get into the diet for those that can tolerate them. Not everybody, as you'll see later, can tolerate these foods. But you definitely want to get these foods in when you see some of these SNPs here. So that gives direction. And I think it's motivating for people. It's one thing to say, eat your broccoli. It's another thing to sit somebody down with their genetic panel and say, really eat your broccoli. This is why, if we give you broccoli and cauliflower and collards and kale, it's going to help you to promote good estrogens and metabolize the harmful estrogens. And we all want to do that. The other thing, though, with the Brassicaceae family, I think a lot of our folks are really used to going in and buying broccoli. Like, that's what they're used to at the grocery store. So getting them away from just broccoli all the time and introducing some of these other members of the Brassicaceae family, because they're going to get different components out of each type of vegetable they choose. So really focus on variety with these folks. Caffeine metabolism. So I love this about the genetic panel. To me, if you don't look at anything else, if you're a coffee drinker, right, you love coffee, if you don't look at anything else, but whether you're a fast or slow coffee metabolizer, I mean, that's worth the $99 right there for the test. You have to look at anything else. So if you are a fast coffee metabolizer, it means that coffee is actually pretty good for you. The studies that come out, one day coffee is really good for you. It's it's going to prevent cardiovascular disease, decrease cancer, colon cancer. The next day caffeine is not good for us. It's all over the board, and it's because individuals metabolize caffeine differently. So if you're a fast coffee metabolizer, good for you. You know that when you read those studies, that the health studies of the benefits, that's going to apply to you, versus if unfortunately you're like me and you're a slow coffee metabolizer, you have to enjoy your cup every so often and not make a habit of it and drink too many cups a day. So folate, of course, we're talking about methylation issues, and the entire methylation cycle centers around the recycling of folate and B12. So of course you're going to need good folate in the diet. Don't make the mistake of starting folate supplementation. Again, that rabbit hole kind of thing. You can think, oh, look at this, I've got a methylation issue, I need lots of folate and B12, and you just start loading up there. There's all those different cycles spin at different rates, and you can really get yourself into trouble if you go that route. That's why I really like the food first approach. And the best way to get folate is to get your leafy green vegetables in, and preferably raw. So I'm not a big raw foodist. I think a lot of people, again, like we talked about, have digestive issues. So if you give them a bunch of raw foods to start with, they're not going to do great on them. But in the long-term diet, having some raw vegetables every day, particularly the leafy greens, it's going to give you that natural folate that you need to help with this entire methylation cycle. What you want to make sure you do not use is folic acid. So Designs for Health, we've been using Designs for Health as a supplement company for a while. Really like those guys. And I think it was probably now 5 or 6 years ago that they got rid of all the folic acid in all of their supplements, and they now only have naturally occurring folate. And so that's what you want to look for, whether it's a supplement company that you're going to utilize in your practice, or if it's a supplement that you're going to take off the shelf. You want to make sure that it has folate in it and not folic acid. In particular, there's some people that have these SNPs for FOLR, and these folks are at a higher risk of not being able to metabolize folic acid, and it can get you in trouble in terms of this methylation cycle. I know I was shooting a video one day, probably a year or so ago, and I was talking about supplements and how to choose the best supplement, and I'm picking one up on the shelf, and I'm looking at the back and showing the camera, and I went through their entire multivitamin line and could not find something that had natural folate and a good form of B12. So I looked a little ridiculous on camera, but you really buyer beware when it comes to this kind of choosing supplements, because a lot of supplement companies are still just out to make a dollar, and a good quality control measurement is to make sure that they have folate and not folic acid. So folate-rich foods are going to be your uncooked leafy greens, beans, lentils, asparagus, carrots, squash, nuts, and seeds. Again, though, digestive health is paramount because if you give somebody with an irritable bowel uncooked leafy greens, beans, lentils, asparagus, all these high FODMAP foods, they are not going to do so well. Okay, so it's definitely person dependent. But in an ideal world, we would get some of these foods in the diet as tolerated. B12 is another factor. Who needs it, how much, what forms. There's a lot of information in looking at the different SNPs on a genetic panel to tell us about somebody's B12 needs and what forms of B12 they might need. Methylcobalamin, hydroxycobalamin, adenosylcobalamin. There's some ways to look at it and really pinpoint somebody's optimal dosages and forms. What you want to do is avoid cyanocobalamin. That's a synthetic form of B12, and that's another quality control to look at when you're choosing supplements off the shelf, is you want to make sure that they don't contain this cyanocobalamin form. I created an acronym called MADDOC, and it's a way for you, I have a quick video on it and a wallet guide. So you can stick it in your wallet when you're at the health food store or shopping online. You can look and make sure, based on this acronym, that you're picking a quality vitamin. And two of the parameters on there are making sure you have folate and making sure you have a methylcobalamin form or one of these other forms and not a cyanocobalamin. So we have that on our website. You're more than welcome to go and download that MADDOC approved video and wallet guide. So some foods that are high in B12: sardines, salmon, tuna, lamb, beef, chicken, eggs, and liver. I'm not a huge fan of eating liver, but I wish I was, because I really do think that it's probably a very underutilized but much needed food in the diet. You have to know where your animals are coming from, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here with most of you. You have to be eating local, free range, grass-fed, because that's what you're eating. Two patients that they're eating, and so these two patients, they're definitely different ages and had some different health complaints, but pretty healthy. Dietary wise, they almost had identical diets, paleo style diet in terms of lots of meats and veggies and some fruits. They were not eating really any grains at all. Very similar diet. The only difference was that one patient was very particular about her meats. Very, very particular. She only grass-fed, local. The other patient had not taken that step yet, so she was still just going to wherever to get her meats and so forth. So their fatty acid panel, the person that was eating, again, similar diets, but the person that was eating meats from just a local conventional grocery store, her fatty acid, she looked like she had been eating at McDonald's for a year. It was really, really fascinating to see the difference in these two panels. So, it's a small population study there, but there's definitely something to it. I think this is really, really important, and hopefully we'll be seeing a lot of research come out in support of grass-fed meats. Are you gluten or lactose intolerant? So there are SNPs related to both of these. If you do the MTHFR app, they will have a section listed out for gluten. So you can see, you have those patients sometimes that are just on the fence about gluten. I don't think gluten is really a health food for anybody, but you do have some people that don't seem to be bothered by it. Maybe they're not eating a lot of it, but they'll go out and have some sourdough bread and they seem fine. So this is kind of the final piece to me, is if they've been doing great on having little amounts of gluten and they're really conscious about their diet, and then they don't have any genetic SNPs for gluten intolerance, then it really makes me feel a lot better about them occasionally having gluten versus the opposite. And then lactose intolerance, that one you actually have to go search the raw data and find some RS numbers to look for. Many people already know if they have lactose intolerance, but again, it's great to see that on paper and really know for sure, giving people that extra bit of information. The other piece with dairy is that dairy can inhibit folate binding. So if you're really trying to work on the folate recycling and you're working on somebody's methylation panel, dairy might negate some of your efforts. So particularly, so many ways that somebody can be sensitive to dairy, and then if it's inhibiting folate, it might be a really good idea for some of these folks to go on a dairy-free, casein-free diet. And then again, if you see that pattern, the SNPs with the IgE, IgG, IgA, they've got dysbiosis, there's autoimmune tendencies, and then you see some SNPs for gluten, you've got a pretty good picture there of what might be going on with this patient and how to treat them. So glutamate, this is where we're going to get into some of the intricacies a little bit of diet and some of these kind of healthier foods sometimes that you wouldn't think you need to eliminate, but you really might need to eliminate for a short period of time. Glutamate is one of them. It's a non-essential amino acid, and glutamate is excitatory. Free glutamate is the problem. But what you can have is when you get too much free glutamate in the diet, you can be susceptible to migraines, ADHD, anxiety, panic, autism, seizures, depression, a host of different things. Again, it depends on if your system is excited, how that expresses in your individual biochemistry. But there's a balance that needs to happen with glutamate and GABA. GABA is your calming neurotransmitter, and glutamate is your excitatory neurotransmitter. So if you have some people with these types of symptoms, and then you see a ton of SNPs for GAD, the GAD SNPs, I think it's Dr. Jess Armine that he calls them the generalized anxiety disorder gene. And it's not necessarily that you're going to have an anxiety disorder, but you are going to be more prone to be in that excitatory state when you have more free glutamates in the diet. So you can see here the pathway of glutamine in the diet going to in the free glutamates here, and then not going to GABA as much if you have a genetic SNP here in the GAD pathway. And this is from Heart Fixer. Anybody who's really looking to learn some more of this information, Heart Fixer, he's a cardiologist, and he's got some great information out there about some of these SNP variations. So here you go, you've got glutamate that's excitatory, GABA that's calming. I think we all want to be in that calming state more so than that excitatory state. You can actually give GABA, you can give theanine, you can give magnesium to move towards for folks, because you can ask them, how do you do with MSG? And most people will tell you because they know how badly they're going to react to MSG. And MSG is a very concentrated source of free glutamate, so it's a little bit different than the ones that you would get in naturally occurring foods. Other components of monosodium glutamate come out. So if you look at this list, some things that are really controversial these days, like carrageenan and natural flavors. Even natural flavors can be a problem here for some folks. Citric acid is found in all over the place. Cornstarch, corn syrup. So you can end up getting too many of these free glutamates in the diet. But really, if you look at this list, for the most part, if you stop eating processed foods, those are going to be out of the diet. You're not going to have to worry about those too much if you just eat a whole foods diet. Now, here's the intricacies, though, is that there are some natural sources of free glutamate that can be problematic, but they can also be seemingly very healthy for folks. Soy sauce, mushrooms, ripe tomatoes, broccoli, peas, walnuts, bone broths. You know, we really have to listen to our patients. There's some amazing diets out there, like the GATS diet, that, again, those are great for 80, maybe 90% of our population, but if you notice somebody's getting worse when they're starting to change a diet and even make a healthy dietary change in what's seemingly the right direction, but they're having problems. You know, in naturopathic medicine, we always call that like a healing crisis. And it can be. People can move through that. But you have to be very aware, because sometimes it's just a sign it's not working for them. And you got to take a step back and reevaluate and see where some of these other pieces of dietary information might be lurking and what kind of somewhat drastic changes you need to make, at least in the short term. So vitamin A, there's some SNPs on here for something, it's a SNP called BCMO, and it converts beta-carotene into the active form of vitamin A. So there's a few pieces in here, as you can probably tell already, for people that are vegetarians, where you can see a vegetarian diet might not be the best choice for them. So they have a lot of SNPs in the area of B12. They've got SNPs here. You can imagine somebody not getting preformed vitamin A in the diet, and they can't convert from their carotenoids. So usually my experience so far has been people that have a lot of SNPs in this area, they're the folks that if you ask them, you know, if you drink a lot of carrot juice, eat a lot of carrots, does your skin turn orange, or the palms of your hands turn orange? And they'll almost always say yes, and that's because they can't convert and they need preformed vitamin A. Without preformed vitamin A, if you're not converting your carotenoids, you're going to end up with immune deficiencies, dry skin, a whole host of vitamin A deficiency related issues. So cod liver oil, here's our liver again, caviar, eggs, raw dairy, those can be really good sources of preformed vitamin A, and they're going to be needed in this these folks. So you can see here beta carotene, here's your BCMO. It's not going to your active form of vitamin A. Or it's not that it's not going, it's just slowed down. Okay? Histamine intolerance. So histamine is actually a neurotransmitter, and histamine is what's released from the cells when we have an allergic type of reaction. So the classic example is hay fever, right? Your eyes start to water, your face gets red, your ears get red, your cells are releasing histamine at inappropriate times. And histamine, which people don't always realize, is actually a neurotransmitter. So it can cause a lot of different brain-related issues too. People with high histamine levels can be very prone to anger and to lashing out and irritability, a lot of mood changes, mood swings. So if you've got these folks, you've got to take a good history, but they've got a lot of itching, they've got unexplained hives and headaches that just don't go away with some of our general naturopathic care, fatigue, red face, red ears, and then lots of that mood liability, then you might want to look at histamines a little bit. There's some DAO SNPs to look at in the genetic panel. DAO is diamine oxidase, and it helps to degrade histamine. So if somebody doesn't have enough of that enzyme, they're really high in some of their IgE SNPs, they can release that histamine too quickly. And really a lot of the histamine release too, when that histamine is coming out of the cells, it's really about leaky cells. And so looking at how you strengthen the cells, going back to digestive health, so again, it always comes back to digestive health. We've got some foods high in histamine here. So a lot of your fermented foods, again, wine, beer, kombucha, sauerkraut, yogurt, dried fruits, aged cheeses, citrus fruits, peanuts. Again, I mean, we've got a huge batch of sauerkraut in our kitchen right now. These are good foods. I'm not telling people to avoid these foods unless you have unexplained symptoms. That's where we have to get into some of these intricacies again. But it's definitely worth it to figure out what somebody's intolerances are. Everything can change when you make some of these adjustments in the diet. Just amazing symptoms can go away. So I really encourage people to start looking deeper into these pieces. Sulfur was my first genetic patient where her brain fog went away so quickly. And really, I'm talking 10 years of brain fog on disability went away. And this is about homocysteine being converted to cystathione. And then it goes too fast. And this is a little bit of a generalization, and it's also fairly controversial about CBS upregulation, CBS downregulation. But what it appears is that when this works too quickly, you get an excess buildup of taurine, ammonia, and sulfur. The body will actually take it to sulfites. So what we have here is a problem where we're losing methyl groups, we're losing powerful antioxidants, and we end up with issues like muscle aches, brain fog, really this classic kind of chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia type of picture. But the big issue here is that when you do some of these things like adding more sulfur to some of these patients, so that's like the extra kale and the cabbage and those things that we started with the Brassicaceae family that are so important for most of us, these folks don't necessarily do well on in the beginning. So you have to really keep that in mind. And a lot of our supplements that we would give that contain high sulfur, like glutathione, NAC, even turmeric, can be a little bit too much for these people. So sometimes, I'm going back thinking about my first few years in practice when some people just weren't getting better or they would get worse on some of the things that I would give them. And now it starts to make sense for some of these folks. So it can be counterintuitive, some of these dietary approaches. But, I had somebody that was on Dr. Furman's diet, which is, high plant-based diet, which is, again, it's good for many people. But, I had to take her off of a lot of these high sulfur foods, and she thought I was crazy, but she got better so quickly. Molybdenum is a nutrient that helps to process sulfur, so sometimes just adding a little bit of molybdenum to these folks can make a big, big difference. You have to watch. Sulfur is a balancing act. Obviously, we really need sulfur. We talked about that from the first couple of slides, but also too much sulfur in some of these folks, especially with chronic issues, chronic symptoms, is not a good thing. But you can't go too low, you can't go too high. You really have to experiment a little bit, and always start slow, always be conservative. So I like to avoid some of the high thiol foods, and I do it just as a trial. I say we're going to do a low thiol food trial. We're going to do it for 10 days. I'll sometimes add a little molybdenum, sometimes not, depending on the patient and how sensitive they are. But here's some of the list of some of these high thiol foods, broccoli, cabbage, onion, garlic, eggs, peanuts, quinoa. I mean, a lot of these foods that we consider very healthy. I do not restrict animal proteins in the diet for these folks as a general rule. Depends on the patient, but there is some talk about maybe doing a vegetarian or a low methionine diet with these folks as well. I don't do that. I haven't found the need to do that, but that's certainly an option and something you might want to look into a little bit. This, I think, is my last slide, or one of my last slides, my last topic. And this I saved for the last because I'm still unsure of what to do with it. This is the ApoE gene. The 3.3 variant is the most common, and the 3.4 and the 4.4 have a much higher risk of Alzheimer's disease, dementia, and cardiovascular disease. So it's a bummer to have to tell somebody if they have a high-risk ApoE genotype, because it really means at the end of the day that they have to do so much more in the health and wellness and exercise department than some of us that are just the 3.3 carriers. But it's unclear what the dietary recommendations really should be, or at least to me. We know that fat is very protective to the brain. About 25% of the brain is made of fat. These ApoEs have trouble, it seems like, getting fat into the brain. It stays in the blood lipid levels, and so their blood lipids become high, elevated. But what's happening with the brain? That's my concern, is because the classic approach is to put them on a very low saturated, very low carbohydrate diet. But I also wonder, is that the best approach? I'm sort of still sifting through all this. We definitely have to reduce inflammation. Prevention and nutrition becomes so important in these folks. But I don't know if anybody has suggestions or they have been working with the ApoE. I have more research. I'd love to know, because it's really hard for me as a practitioner to take a lot of these fats away from folks. I'm somebody that tends to recommend a pretty high-fat diet, and so I struggle here in this area with the ApoEs. But it's great information to know. I believe knowledge is power, so it's something that's available to you on the genetic panel. You usually do have to go in and look up the RS numbers through the raw data to get somebody's complete ApoE gene, but I think it's worthwhile, and we'll know more and more about it as time goes on. So recap, food first is always the most important. Clearly, one diet does not fit all. I think that we finalize that this evening by looking at some of these really healthy foods that might not be working for some folks. Genetic testing offers us a blueprint, but you really have to take the case, look at the clinical picture, get the family history. It's not just a really simple, this SNP is not working so well, give you this supplement. Doesn't quite work that way all the time. Okay, and then I did promise when I first put this talk together is that I wanted to mention the top 3 food changes that I think bad MTHFRs could do right away, and so this is what I came up with after putting the slides together. And I think the biggest food change for any of us, but clearly for people that have methylation issues, is to remove all the processed foods from the diet. When you do that part, you're going to get rid of a lot of free glutamates, you're going to get rid of sulfites, you're going to get rid of a lot of the folate inhibitors and high folic acid, which is synthetic, that's coming into our foods. So you're going to be pretty golden. It's not going to get everybody, but that's a great place to start. You want to focus on your leafy greens. I believe in eating vegetables that are cooked, but you want to get some leafy greens uncooked on a daily basis as well, so you can get that good source of folate. And then I think you should add in clean organ meats. When I look back at all the slides that I put together, organ meats are at the top of the list. They've got the preformed vitamin A in them. They've got the really absorbable B12. They've got everything you need if you're a bad methylator, in my opinion. So I think liver is probably the new yet old superfood. We have all these fancy superfoods out there like acai and chia seeds and all kinds of stuff, but maybe good old liver that we've been eating for hundreds and thousands of years might be the real superfood. So that's it. Thank you so much. You can find us online. Please connect with us. And if you want to get that Mad Doc protocol, please do. It's a 5-minute video and a wallet guide to help you choose good supplements.
Sherri, thank you so much. That was incredible. Thank you so much. I am glad we got it to work too. I mean, you got on right at the last second, so I was thrilled you were able to get on and give us such a wonderful presentation.
Thanks, Ken.
So I'm gonna, before everybody out there, you go ahead and you can type your questions into the question box. We'll try to get through all of them. we'll do it in a discussion format. And so while I'm talking to Sherri here, go ahead and just type away your questions, and we'll get through them. Sherri, so just to recap, that people can get, well, let me just put it this way: people who want to do this genetic testing, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. To help them interpret this, they can just get in touch with you, right? And you would take them through this to help them interpret everything?
Yeah, I mean, if somebody wants me to interpret, I do recommend that you work with a practitioner, particularly. I mean, some people just like to kind of experiment with themselves, and they're, in really good health, and they kind of just think it's fun to do. That's sort of different than if somebody's got chronic symptoms or health issues. You do want to work with a practitioner because you can see how intricate those cycles are, and you don't want to throw anything out of whack. We have this idea that if it's natural, it's safe, and certainly
Right.
natural is a lot more safe than pharmaceuticals, but you can throw things out of whack. So I think it is important to work with someone, and I do interpret methylation panels. My husband and I both do. I like to have a visit with the patient first, so I can get a really good history,
Okay.
get some really good potential labs, and then when I look at their methylation panel, I can put those pieces together and sort of decide what might be affecting them and what might not really make any sense for them.
Yeah, we have a lot of people on the line who are probably itching to get this testing done, and then get in contact with you to help them sift through the data. So however you go about that, but I'm the same way. I prefer definitely having a general wellness visit, whether it's either by phone or in person, before we even get into that. But I imagine you're the same way. Is that correct?
I am the same way. I have had a few cases, though. I've got, because not many doctors are looking at these
Right.
panels, and I cannot. I can see why. But sometimes if somebody's working, like I've got some patients in California right now that have great practitioners, naturally oriented practitioners, but they just need me to look at the methylation cycles a little bit, and so I'll do that for them, absolutely, and knowing that they're in good hands with their practitioner, and then kind of go back and forth with their practitioner.
Right. Yeah, I think it's smart, but at least people have a resource, or a healthcare team with you to help them interpret that data if they need it. Then, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Um, so we have some docs on the line, but we also have some lay people on the line. As far as when you say MTHFR, what does that actually mean for the lay person?
Um, so it's an enzyme that helps to recycle folate and B12. So, I mean, that's really all you have to do when you think about it.
Okay.
But what you have to realize is how important B12 and folate are for every part of the body. So that's where I think maybe we talk about taking, B supplements so much that maybe people don't realize the impact of what it means to not have good B12 or folate status. It really can affect the entire system.
So some people just have this enzyme, this particular enzyme we're talking about just doesn't work as well then, right? But we have to look at the whole system to see how everything affects that enzyme.
Exactly, and you'll see people will kind of freak out sometimes when they look like, for instance, for myself, I'm what's called a compound heterozygous. So I kind of have a double whammy in the methylation department, so to speak.
Yeah.
So in certain scenarios, you can look online and you can see, wow, I'm really, I could be infertile and I could have high risk of miscarriages. Well, I've had two very, pretty easy pregnancies and two amazingly healthy kids. So again, it's not really about the individual SNPs. It's about whether they're expressing, and you're doing everything that you can to make sure that those enzymes are working as well as they can. So just because you have the SNP doesn't necessarily mean that it's causing a problem.
Yeah. When you were talking about supplements, so we're getting some questions about supplements, and what is the to make sure they have appropriate folate? What are they exactly looking for in a supplement, and what are the best ones that? I mean, I know you probably can't say names so much. I know you mentioned Designs for Health, and I really like them too because they do use natural folate. But somebody who's getting a supplement off the shelf, what should they be looking for in terms of this methylation to help them with being a good methylator or to prevent them from being a bad methylator?
Yeah, well, you can. You want to look for. Make sure you don't have folic acid. You want to make sure that you have. It says folate on there. And what I've noticed a lot of companies do is they'll actually say folate, but in parentheses it'll have folic acid. So you really want to make sure you're looking for that word folic acid, because it just 'cause it says folate, it doesn't mean that it's the right kind of folate if it says next to it folic acid. So that's what you want to look for. I know Dr. Ben has a B vitamin formula that has all the B's in it except for folate and B12. Again, because some folks are so sensitive, when you start to add in the B12 or the folate, you really need to do it in a separate supplement as you start to increase those dosages. And so, you know, it's just different for everybody.
Okay. So a lot of questions also about how does one go about getting this test done, some of this genetic testing? Where would they go? I know you mentioned some names, but for the average person, how do they go about getting this test done?
So there's a lot of companies out that are doing genetic testing these days. It's called nutrigenomics, where you're looking at nutrition in relation to your genes. Most companies that are doing it, like a lot of the nutrition-based companies, they're only pulling out certain SNPs, and so they might have, you know, a certain SNP panel for weight loss or a certain SNP panel for, you know, certain nutrients or what have you. I like the 23andMe because you get so much information. Nobody's just taking little pieces out. You're really getting hundreds and hundreds of data points. And it's $99. I mean, you cannot be, and that same test, I don't know, 5, 10 years ago would have been thousands of dollars. So the fact that we can get that much information for $99 is just amazing to me. So that's my preference, is to go through 23andMe. But as I said, you know, you have to take that information and then you have to get it into a different app so that you can actually utilize the information. And that's where maybe it gets a little tricky for some folks, because they don't know how to download the information. But that's why I use MTHFR support app. There's Genetic Genie. There's LiveWello. There's all kinds of apps that will translate some of that information for you.
I'm like you. I'm kind of partial to 23andMe, and that's a real easy thing. I mean, you just go online to 23andMe, order your kit, they send it to you. Basically, you spit in a vial and send it back to them, and in like 3 or 4 weeks, I think it is, the turnaround time, you get all this data, right?
Yeah, exactly, and it's the best spit collection I've ever seen. You know, you probably run tons of spit tests like I do, and people are walking around the house for an hour in the morning doing some of these hormone saliva tests. But the 23andMe, it's amazing how little saliva they need to get all of that information. So it's a really easy test to do. You don't need a doctor to order. Weeks. So that's maybe the benefit.
Okay, yeah, we lost you there for a second, but basically you were saying 23andMe is, you get a lot of information. It's probably that's the one I'm used to. It sounds like that's the one you use mostly also, and a lot of good other information too. A lot of the ancestry information is really good there too. As far as somebody who wants to do this test, should they be eliminating foods before they run a test like this, or does it matter?
You broke up on me a little bit. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. I was just asking, like, if somebody wants to run these genetic tests, should they?
Can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, it sounds like we have a bad connection now. But what I was saying, if you can hear me, Sherri, and if not, we'll just.
I can hear you now.
Okay. As far as the diet goes, should somebody be eliminating foods before or after they run these tests, or does it matter?
Yeah, so for the genetic tests, absolutely not. I mean, it's your genes. They're never going to change. They're there for the long haul. But the other test that I went through was the food sensitivity test. And that's part of the controversy of doing a food sensitivity test, is that, you know, if you eat a lot of a certain food and you take that test, it might show up high because you eat it quite often. Now, to me, that still means that the body's upregulating the immune system and creating immunoglobulins against that food. It still means it's not working for you, whether it's just because it's a sensitivity or you're just having too much of it in the diet. It's still great information. You need to get that food out for a little while so your body can heal. But if if we get to the end of the cleanse, sometimes we're taking out some of the inflammatory foods, and then people ask about doing a food sensitivity test at that point. You may find that after a 21-day cleanse, and you haven't eaten, say, gluten or dairy for 21 days, and you read a food sensitivity panel, it's probably not going to show up. Had you done the test prior to the cleanse, it may have shown up. So you just have to realize that piece of information and know, well, if you feel better off the food, stay off the food, and now do the test and see if some other foods show up.
I see. I know we're running out of time here, but how about one more question and then we'll end it. So tell me.
Perfect.
Okay, so tell me, what do you mean by methylation support? What are we actually saying there when you say let's support your methylation pathways for the layperson?
Sorry. Yeah, you broke up a little bit on me there.
I was asking, what do you mean? What do you mean by methylation support? How would you explain that to the layperson when we're trying to support methylation pathways?
So I would explain that by, basically, like what I was talking about, a food first approach. How do we support when we're looking at all the cycles, the methylation cycles in the body? We're looking at the different processes that are going on to create healthy cells, for repair, or healthy neurotransmitters, healthy brain function. So when you give all the necessary cofactors through diet, through supplements, when you remove some of the offending agents, so like some of the inflammatory foods or some of the toxins that we're exposed to, all of these things that can slow down this process that's happening in every single cell, then that's when you get healthy methylation. Healthy methylation means you're going to repair your cells, you're going to create good brain health, you're going to detox appropriately. So it's avoidance of certain things, and it's adding in certain healthy things so that your cells can function to their very best.
And so your genes can also express themselves, right? Hence you're saying the same thing to their very best too. So which gives you healthy cell expression also. Well, it looks like we got that last question answered, everybody. Thank you so much, Dr. Jacobs. I can hear you a little bit, but you're going in and out. But I'll go ahead and end it here because I think you answered that question great for everybody out there. If anybody else has any questions, you can also get in touch with Dr. Jacobs with her information that was up there. You can also get in touch with Metabolic Effect. You can email us at clinic@metabolic-effect, or go to our Facebook page, or go to Dr. Jacobs' HEalthE Coaching, 21daymetabolicCleanse.com, and you can get in touch with her there. And if you have trouble with getting in touch with her, please get in touch with us at Metabolic Effect, and we will get you there. Everybody, thank you for being with us tonight. Have a wonderful evening. I will be presenting in a couple weeks on why diets fail. Just go to Facebook, to the Metabolic Effect Facebook page. You also may get it in your email too when the next webinar is. Thank you so much. Have a good night. Thanks for being with us. Start being good MTHFRs.